there's this silly notion among our elite, Barack Obama included, that, and you know, it's hard to tell if he's saying this to get elected or if this is what he really believes, but the notion that by sending more troops into Afghanistan, you can somehow solve the problems of that country. The Soviet Union sent its entire army into Afghanistan. They got their butts kicked, and it wrecked the communist empire. Actually, it brought down communism, the defeat that they suffered at the hands of the Afghan rebels who were trained by the United States. Now, this is an important little history lesson that most Americans don't know. There was a regime in Afghanistan in the 1970s that had come to power through a military coup. These were officers who had been trained in the Soviet Union. You got a somewhat left-of-center government come to power in Afghanistan. The Carter administration, Jimmy Human Rights Carter, Zbigniew Brzezinski, his national security advisor, came up with this idea: we'll send the CIA in, we'll create trouble for this regime in Afghanistan by funding these rebels, these mujahideen guys, Osama bin Laden type guys. They'll create trouble for this government. The Soviets will send troops in to support that government, and the mujahideen will weaken the Soviets and maybe even crush their military. Well, that happened. It actually worked out, and Zbigniew Brzezinski, to this day, admits to it, that that was their strategy. So they were sending in mercenaries into a country that had a government that was recognized by everybody in the world, that was no threat to us. They trained up these mujahideen rebels, these Islamic militants. Once the Soviet Union gets kicked out, then the US government, the CIA, says, okay, we're done with you guys. These guys are like, wait a minute, this was the biggest CIA project ever. They gave billions of dollars and all sorts of training and weapons, including ground-to-air missiles, right, Stinger missiles, to these guys. So now you've got guys who, they have the weapons and everything like that, but they're really ticked off. They're angry at the United States for dumping them. At the same time, in the 70s, you have the government of Iran under the Shah. It means king. Actually, he was Shahanshah, the king of kings. He had been put in power by the United States in 1953. We gave him all the weapons he could possibly ask for, short of nuclear weapons. He gets overthrown in the late 70s by Khomeini, right? This right-wing fundamentalist mullah. And now, then you had a government starting in the late 70s that wasn't a right-wing dictator who was friendly to the United States. It was a right-wing dictator who said the United States is the devil. Yeah. So the United States, the leaders think, what are we going to do? Here's what we'll do. We'll get Iraq under Saddam Hussein to fight with Iran and break the legs of the Iranian economy. So for 8 years, from 1980 to 1988, the Reagan years, the two Reagan administrations, the U.S. supports Saddam Hussein, gives him all sorts of weapons and intelligence to invade Iran, bomb Iranian cities, kill thousands and thousands of Iranians, wreck their economy, and then at the end of that war in 1988, all right, now you got this issue of this guy Saddam Hussein, who you helped strengthen. What are we going to do about him? Let's figure out some pretext for invading Iraq. So when Iraq goes into Kuwait during the early Bush administration to seize an oil field that was on the border between Kuwait and Iraq, and the Kuwaitis were slant drilling underneath Iraqi territory to suck this oil out. It was actually technology they got from a Texas oil company. Iraq invades Kuwait. U.S. says, we can't allow this. We're going to have to invade Iraq. And the whole thing starts. Now, here's the question people in this country need to ask. If Iraq's major export, or Iran's major export, or Saudi Arabia's major export was broccoli instead of oil, would we have any troops there? Would we have any military bases there? No, we wouldn't. It's all about oil, which comes back to us in that we have this car-centric economy, and we always want to drive around in big, fat SUVs that waste gas, etc. Well, that's what that war's about. That's why people are dying. That's why we're spending trillions of dollars on military hardware, because we've got this oil-dominated economy, which is why we're doing the green festivals and all this green economy work to show people, wait a minute, we've got to switch to a different kind of economy, a green economy. I If I was president, I'd try and give up the power really quickly. What you realize when you study, most of my research, my doctoral dissertation and the 13 or 14 books, who's counting, have been about U.S. foreign policy and government policy in general. And what you learn right away when you study the structure of the U.S. government is, even if you're president, you don't control the whole situation. We saw it, we did the recycling and composting for the Democratic National Convention in Denver at the Pepsi Center. And what I saw was when the Secret Service wanted something a certain way, everybody just falls in, oh, the Secret Service wants it that way, it has to be that way. So there's this security, they call it, the national security state. You've got the Defense Department, the Offense Department, the Pentagon, right? The Pentagon, which the largest office building in the world at the time it was built in the 1940s to fight World War II. At the end of World War II, the Pentagon was supposed to be converted into a hospital. It was never converted into a hospital, which tells you about where the power lies. We've got dozens of intelligence agencies: the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, the Marines, Defense Intelligence Agency, CIA, the NSA, the National Security Agency, bigger than the CIA, more staff than the CIA, secret budget, we don't even know how much they spend, right? So we've got this massive infrastructure of empire, over 700 U.S. military bases outside the United States. You and I, all of us, are paying for that, right? Everybody watching this show, we're paying for that with our tax money. And now that these big corporations like Bear Stearns and AIG and Merrill Lynch and all these others are collapsing, are going bankrupt because of bad management and bad gambling, we, the people, through our government, are coming in and bailing them out. Not bailing out the little homeowners who can't pay their mortgages. No, no, no. That would be cheaper, actually. But bail out the big guys, the rich guys who are getting paid $10 million a year. You and I, with our taxes, are bailing those guys out now. So if we don't develop in the heads of the American people an understanding of the empire and that imperialism is a bad thing, and then how do we make a transition from being an empire to just being a nation in a community of nations, we're going to see some really hard times in this country.